Windows Driver Framework, components of a PCI driver, DriverEntry routine. As you can see here, we have the syntax of the routine. The first argument of the routine is the driver object, which is a pointer to the driver object data structure. The second argument of the routine is the registry path, which is a pointer to a Unicode string data structure. The routine returns an NT status value indicating whether the initialization process was successful or not. Now, I'm going to list the tasks that needs to be done in order to make use of this routine. The first task is the declaration of the status variable. The second task is the declaration of the config variable. The third task is the declaration of the attrib variable. Next, we will need to declare the driver variable. Then, we will need to declare the driver context variable. We will need also to initialize the attrib variable. And then, we will fill the attrib variable with the desired callbacks. We need also to initialize the config variable. And then, create a WDFDRIVER object that will be saved in the driver variable. Furthermore, we need to check if the WDFDRIVER object was created successfully. Then, we will obtain a driver context instance. And, if desired, initialize members of driver context. This task is optional. Finally, we need to return status. Task number 1, declare the status variable. As you can see in the code example, we declared the status variable and initialized it to status success. The NT status values are divided into 4 types: success values, informational values, warnings, and error values. The developer need to check for any error that may happen during the initialization process and return the correct status value. Task number 2, declare the config variable. In the code example, we declared the config variable and kept it uninitialized. This variable will be used later. Please keep in mind that the type of the variable is the WDFDRIVER config data structure. Task number 3, declare the attrib variable. In the code example, we declared the attrib variable and kept it uninitialized. This variable will be used later. The type of the variable is the WDF object attributes data structure. Task number 4, declare the driver variable. In the code example, we declared the driver variable and kept it uninitialized. This variable will be used later. The type of the variable is the WDFDRIVER data structure. Task number 5, declare the driver context variable. In the code example, we declared the driver context variable and kept it uninitialized. This variable will be used later. The driver context variable is a pointer to the driver context data structure that is defined by the developer. We say that this structure is driver defined. Task number 6, initialize the attrib variable. To initialize the attrib variable, we are going to use the WDF object attributes init context type macro. The macro accepts 2 arguments. The first argument, which is the address of the attrib variable. The second argument, which is the name of a structure, in this case driver context. As we said before, the driver context data structure is driver defined, so it should be implemented by the developer. Task number 7, fill the attrib variable with desired callbacks. As you can see in the code example, we assigned a callback function to the cleanup callback event. We will discuss later the EVT object context cleanup event. Task number 8, initialize the config variable. As you can see in the code example, we used the WDFDRIVER config init function to initialize the config variable. The function accepts 2 arguments. The first argument, which is the address of the config variable. The second argument, which is a callback event function that handles the driver device add event. We will discuss later this event. Task number 9, create a WDFDRIVER object that will be saved in the driver variable. The WDFDRIVER create method creates a framework driver object for the calling driver. The method accepts multiple arguments. The last argument is the driver variable that will receive the created object. The method returns NT status value that needs to be checked. Task number 10, check that the WDFDRIVER object was created successfully. To check that the object was successfully created, we need to use the NT status macro. The macro returns true value if the object was created successfully, otherwise it returns false value. Task number 11, obtain a driver context instance. In order to obtain a driver context instance, we need to use the getDriverContext function. In this code example, we assign the return value to the driver context variable. We will discuss later the getDriverContext function. Task number 12, initialize members of driver context. In this code example, we suppose that our driver context structure contains the receive_lookAside member. The idea here is to initialize the members of the driver context data structure. Just keep in mind that it is the responsibility of the developer to define this structure. Task number 13, return status. In this code example, we simply return the status variable. Summary. This summary shows the tasks that needs to be done. At first, we declare the status variable. Then, we declare the config variable. Then, we declare the attrib variable. Then, we declare the driver variable. Then, we declare the driver context variable. Then, we initialize the attrib variable. Then, we fill the attrib variable with desired callbacks. Then, we initialize the config variable. Then, we create a WDFDRIVER object. Then, we check if the object creation was successful. Then, we obtain the driver context instance. Then, we optionally initialize the members of the driver context. And finally, return the status.